A woman calls the police because her husband is beating her. The officer tells her, "Go home and be patient." A gay man is beaten on the street in broad daylight. The government does not condemn the attack. Instead, it bans pride marches and passes a constitutional amendment against LGBTQ rights. A political activist posts criticism of the government on social media. The next morning, state security agents are at the door, and a new law, copied almost word for word from Russia, forces NGOs to register as foreign agents. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said this at the Human Rights Council in February 2026.
Human rights are under a full-scale attack around the world. The rule of law is being outmuscled by the rule of force.
Behind the European dream, there is a different reality. This is Georgia today. We base these videos on the analysis of real cases of people facing persecution in their home countries. We are country expert witnesses from London, focusing on human rights violations. We receive cases from major law firms who represent asylum seekers in the United Kingdom, United States, Canada, and the European Union. Our goal is to prepare evidence-based assessments and expert witness reports for asylum tribunals. Today, why people flee Georgia. To understand why people flee Georgia today, you need to understand its history. Georgia is a small country in the South Caucasus. It has a population of about 3.7 million people. It sits between Russia to the north, Turkey and Armenia to the south, and Azerbaijan to the east. For most of the 20th century, Georgia was part of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Georgia declared independence. But independence brought war, not peace. Civil wars broke out in the regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Tens of thousands of people were displaced. These conflicts remain frozen to this day. In 2003, the Rose Revolution brought a new government to power. President Mikhail Saakashvili promised democratic reforms and closer ties with Europe. Georgia made progress on corruption and economic growth. But the reforms did not last. In 2008, Russia and Georgia fought a 5-day war. Russia invaded Georgia and recognized the breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent states. Today, Russia occupies approximately 20% of Georgian territory. Russian soldiers are stationed less than 1 hour from Tbilisi. In 2012, a new party came to power, Georgian Dream. It was founded by Bidzina Ivanishvili, the richest man in Georgia, a billionaire who made his fortune in Russia. At first, Georgian Dream continued the European integration path. Georgia signed an association agreement with the European Union in 2014. Georgia received EU candidate status in December 2023. But then the turn began. In 2024, the Georgian parliament passed the law on transparency of foreign influence. This law is almost identical to Russia's foreign agent law. It requires any NGO that receives more than 20% of its funding from abroad to register as an organization carrying the interests of a foreign power. The European Union responded immediately. In June 2024, the EU suspended Georgia's accession process. The European dream was put on hold.
Some weaponize their economic leverage. They spread disinformation to distract, silence, and marginalize. The struggle for human rights can never be derailed by the whims of a handful of leaders with reactionary, supremacist agendas.
Then came another blow. In September 2024, the Georgian parliament passed a constitutional amendment that effectively bans same-sex marriage, adoption by same-sex couples, and any legal recognition of LGBTQ relationships. The law also restricts so-called propaganda about LGBTQ issues, making it dangerous to even talk about gay rights. And there is another piece of this picture, the Pankisi Gorge. The Pankisi Gorge is a valley in northeastern Georgia. It is home to the Kists, ethnic Chechens who have lived there for generations. After the Chechen wars in the 1990s and 2000s, refugees from Chechnya also settled in Pankisi. The Russian government accused Georgia of sheltering Chechen fighters. The Georgian security services carried out raids. Residents of Pankisi have faced surveillance, arbitrary detention, and profiling ever since. Now let us talk about who is at risk in Georgia today. We see 8 main groups. First, domestic violence survivors. Women who face violence from partners and family members and who cannot get protection from the state. Second, LGBTQ people, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender Georgians who face violence, discrimination, and now laws that criminalize their identity. Third, political activists and opposition members, people who criticize Georgian Dream and face arrest, surveillance, and prosecution. Fourth, journalists and NGO workers, especially those now targeted under the Foreign Agent Law. Fifth, ethnic minorities, including ethnic Azerbaijanis, Armenians, and other communities who face discrimination in employment, education, and access to justice. Sixth, residents of the Pankisi Gorge, ethnic Chechens and Kists who face security service profiling and surveillance. Seventh, business people targeted by criminal gangs, entrepreneurs who refuse to pay protection money and are threatened, attacked, or framed by organized crime. Eighth, anti-government protesters, people who participated in the 2023 and 2024 protest movements and now face criminal charges. If you are from Georgia and you have faced persecution, our team of expert witnesses based in London prepares personal risk assessments for asylum cases. We work with immigration lawyers across the UK, US, Canada, and EU. If you need an expert witness report for your case, or if you are a lawyer looking for a country expert, you will find all the details in the link in the description below. In 2006, Georgia passed a law on elimination of domestic violence, protection of and assistance to victims of domestic violence. This law created a restraining order system. It gave police the power to issue temporary protection orders. It made domestic violence a criminal offense. On paper, this looks good, but the reality is different. The public defender of Georgia, the country's own ombudsman, has repeatedly criticized the enforcement of domestic violence laws. Police officers routinely refuse to issue protection orders. When they do issue them, the orders are often not enforced. Abusers violate restraining orders and face no consequences. In some cases we have analyzed, police officers are themselves perpetrators of domestic violence. They carry service weapons. They use their position to intimidate victims. And their colleagues, other police officers, refuse to act against them. Georgian society has deeply traditional gender roles. Men are expected to be the heads of their families. Women are expected to tolerate violence. Divorce is seen as shameful. A woman who leaves her husband faces enormous pressure from her own family, from his family, from the entire community to go back.
That appeasement in the light of most severe human rights violations never prevails, and that we should not learn the hard lesson again.
The expert view on domestic violence in Georgia is this. The laws exist. Georgia has signed the Istanbul Convention. Georgia has restraining orders. Georgia has shelters. But there is a systematic failure of enforcement. Police do not take domestic violence seriously. Restraining orders are pieces of paper. Shelters have limited capacity and limited duration. And traditional attitudes mean that the entire community puts pressure on women to stay with their abusers. This is what we call a failure of state protection. The state has the tools, but it refuses to use them. The President of the United Nations General Assembly, Annalena Baerbock, said this at the Human Rights Council in February 2026.
That women's rights are indeed the benchmark for the state of a society, the state of the world. Because if women, meaning half of the world population, 4 billion people, are not safe, no one will be safe.
Now, LGBTQ persecution in Georgia. This is one of the most dangerous categories. And the situation is getting worse, not better. Let me tell you what happened on the 5th of July, 2021. That day, Tbilisi Pride, the first major LGBTQ event in Georgia, was supposed to take place. Instead, far-right groups and vigilantes, some of them led by Orthodox priests, stormed through the streets. They attacked journalists. They attacked anyone they suspected of being LGBTQ. 53 journalists were injured. One cameraman later died from injuries sustained during the violence. The police stood by and watched. Since then, the situation has become much worse. In September 2024, the Georgian parliament passed a package of constitutional amendments known as the Family Values Law. This law defines marriage as a union between a man and a woman. It bans adoption by same-sex couples. It bans legal gender recognition, and it restricts what the law calls propaganda about LGBTQ relationships, meaning that even discussing LGBTQ rights in public can be punished. This law is modeled on Russia's anti-LGBT legislation. ILGA Europe, the leading European LGBTQ rights organization, ranks Georgia among the worst countries in Europe for LGBTQ rights. In their 2025 Rainbow Map, Georgia scores below 10% on their Equality Index.
We see it in a tightening grip on civic space, journalists and activists jailed, NGOs shut down, women's rights rolled back, children's rights ignored, persons with disabilities excluded, democracies eroding, the right of peaceful assembly crushed.
The expert view is this: Georgia is not safe for LGBTQ people. The state does not protect them. The police do not take homophobic violence seriously. The new constitutional amendments have made the situation significantly worse. They send a signal from the state that LGBTQ people are not equal citizens. Societal attitudes are deeply hostile. A 2023 survey by the Caucasus Research Resource Center found that more than 80% of Georgians say they would not want an LGBTQ neighbor. Political persecution in Georgia. This is perhaps the most dramatic change in the country. Georgia was once seen as a democratic success story in the post-Soviet space. That is no longer the case. The Foreign Agent Law, passed in May 2024, is the centerpiece of this crackdown. Let me explain what this law does. Any non-governmental organization or media outlet that receives more than 20% of its funding from abroad must register as an entity carrying the interests of a foreign power. The government has the right to monitor these organizations, demand financial reports, and impose heavy fines. The Venice Commission, the Council of Europe's legal advisory body, reviewed this law and concluded that it mirrors Russia's foreign agent legislation. The Venice Commission stated that the law has a chilling effect on civil society and recommended Georgia repeal it. Georgia did not repeal it. When the law was being debated in parliament, tens of thousands of Georgians took to the streets. The protests were massive, the largest since the Rose Revolution. The government responded with tear gas, water cannons, and mass arrests. Hundreds of protesters were detained. Many reported being beaten in detention. Some were charged with criminal offenses that carry years in prison.
Developments around the world point to a deeply worrying trend. Domination and supremacy are making a comeback. If we listen to the rhetoric of some leaders, what lurks behind it is a belief that they are above the law and above the UN Charter.
The expert view: Georgia now has a pattern of selective prosecution. The government targets opposition figures, independent journalists, and civil society leaders. The charges are often vague: hooliganism, organizing disorder, inciting violence. But the real reason is political criticism. The Foreign Agent Law has created a climate of fear. NGOs that provide essential services, legal aid, human rights monitoring, election observation, are now forced to choose between losing their funding and being labeled as foreign agents. The European Union has made clear that this is incompatible with EU membership. Georgia's accession process remains suspended. Now, gang violence and ethnic minorities. Georgia has a serious problem with organized crime. And this problem intersects with ethnicity in ways that make certain groups especially vulnerable. Georgia's criminal underworld has a long history. The thieves in law, a system of organized crime bosses inherited from the Soviet era, have been a powerful force in Georgian society for decades. The Saakashvili government launched a major crackdown on them. But the problem has not disappeared. It has evolved. Today, protection rackets target businesses, especially in smaller cities and rural areas. Entrepreneurs who refuse to pay face threats, attacks, and sometimes murder. Finally, the shadow of Russia over Georgia. This is not a separate persecution category, but it is the context that shapes everything else. Russia occupies approximately 20% of Georgian territory. In the occupied regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, approximately 300,000 people have been displaced. Russian soldiers continue to move the boundary line, a process known as borderization. Georgian farmers wake up to find that Russian barbed wire has moved overnight, cutting them off from their own land. At the same time, the Georgian Dream government has been moving closer to Moscow. The foreign agent law mirrors Russian legislation. The anti-LGBT amendments mirror Russian legislation. Senior government figures have made anti-Western statements. The government has refused to impose sanctions on Russia following the invasion of Ukraine. Many Georgians see this as a betrayal of the country's European path. For asylum seekers from Georgia, this context matters. It shows a pattern, a government that is becoming more authoritarian. A government that is targeting the same groups that authoritarian regimes always target: the opposition, the press, civil society, LGBTQ people, and minorities. The direction is clear, and it is not towards Europe. Now let us look at the numbers. How do Georgian asylum claims perform? First, the United Kingdom. Georgia is on the UK Home Office's list of designated safe countries under the Nationality and Borders Act 2022. This means the Home Office considers Georgia a country where people are generally not at risk of persecution. But, and this is important, being on the safe country list does not mean that claims are automatically refused. It means there is a presumption of safety. The burden is on the applicant to show why they personally face a risk. And Georgian claims are granted. They are granted in domestic violence cases. They are granted in LGBTQ cases. They are granted in cases involving political persecution. In the European Union, Georgian asylum applications have increased significantly since 2023. Germany, France, and the Netherlands receive the highest numbers. Grant rates vary, but they are rising, especially for LGBTQ claims and political persecution claims since the 2024 crackdowns. In the United States, Georgian asylum claims are also increasing. The US Department of Homeland Security and the Executive Office for Immigration Review process these cases. LGBTQ claims from Georgia have a relatively high success rate in US immigration courts because US judges recognize the severity of the persecution environment. UNHCR data shows that the number of Georgian nationals seeking international protection worldwide has increased by over 30% between 2023 and 2025. The 2024 legislative changes, the foreign agent law, and the anti-LGBT amendments are the primary drivers. Internal relocation. This is one of the most common arguments the Home Office uses against Georgian asylum claims. They say, Georgia is a safe country. Even if you face a risk in one area, you can move to another part of Georgia. UK Upper Tribunal, country guidance on Georgia, and internal relocation. But there are three fundamental problems with this argument in the Georgian context. First, Georgia is a very small country. The population is 3.7 million. Tbilisi, the capital, has about 1.2 million people. The second city, Kutaisi, has less than 150,000. Everyone knows everyone. Family networks extend across the entire country. A domestic violence survivor who moves to another city will be found by her family within weeks. Second, conservative social attitudes are not limited to one region. They are nationwide. A gay man who moves from Tbilisi to Batumi faces the same hostility. A woman who divorces her husband in Kutaisi faces the same stigma as in Zugdidi. The attitudes that enable persecution are national, not local. Third, the State Security Service operates everywhere. For political activists and NGO workers, targeted by the government. There is no part of Georgia that is outside the reach of state security. The same agency that detained a protester in Tbilisi can find that person in Batumi, in Kutaisi, in any village in the country. Georgia is not India or Russia. There is nowhere to hide.
Women and young people especially are leading these movements. They are claiming their rights to basic living conditions, to fair pay, to bodily autonomy, to self-determination, to be heard, to vote freely, and many other rights.
Let me close with the big picture. Freedom House rates Georgia as partly free in its 2025 Freedom in the World report. Georgia's score has been declining every year since 2020. The trend is clear. The direction is towards less freedom, not more.
So being a member of this Human Rights Council, a member state, an ambassador, a minister, an UN official in these times is not a spectator sport. We are not bystanders who have the luxury of standing on the sidelines while injustice unfolds. Silence is a choice, inaction is a choice, and it has consequences.
The foreign agent law targets civil society. The anti-LGBT amendments target LGBTQ people. Selective prosecutions target the opposition. Inadequate enforcement of domestic violence laws puts women at risk. Ethnic minorities and Pankisi Gorge residents face profiling. Organized crime operates with impunity. And behind all of this, Russia's shadow grows longer. Georgia is not at war. Georgia is not a failed state. Georgia has laws and institutions, but laws without enforcement are meaningless. Institutions captured by one party are not independent. And a government that copies Russia's playbook while claiming to want to join Europe is deceiving its own people. This is why people flee Georgia, not because they want to, but because the European dream that was promised to them is being taken away, not by an outside enemy, but by their own government. If you are from Georgia and you have faced persecution, an expert witness report can strengthen your asylum case. Our team based in London prepares personal assessments for courts and tribunals. Details in the link in the description. If you are an immigration lawyer representing a client from Georgia and you need a country expert witness, you will find our details in the description below. This was an episode of The Human Rights. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.